You may know this man already for the great work that he does as the editor and lead Cubs writer for Bleacher Nation. If not, you'll get to meet him today. It's a pleasure to welcome Brett Taylor to Locked On Cubs coming up next.
You are Locked On Cubs, your daily Chicago Cubs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning. Welcome in. This is indeed Locked On Cubs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Andrew Bellison. Thanks for being with us again this morning. It's always so great to spend the mornings with you. I say it every day and I mean it. I'm a broken record, but it's such a pleasure to be along for the ride. You guys are what make Locked On Cubs go, and I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for taking the time to make us your first listen each and every morning. It means the world to me. Engage with us on social media, please, at Chicago Cubs PA, at Locked On Cubs, and engage with our guest as well at Bleacher Nation. Brett Taylor, welcome to Locked On Cubs. Thank you so much for taking the time to stop by. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I've told you that. We never really officially met until right now, I guess, but I want to hop right in. We got to have some of the normal offseason baseball-wise before they shut down the business end. But what's the latest in your world on that front with hashing out a new CBA and hopefully turning the page and moving forward here with the league schedule?
Yeah, we got just enough before the lockout to tease us, excite us, titillate us, and then shut it down just so that it would hurt all the more. Yeah, so, as Andrew alluded to, the lockout kicked in December 1st. Not that I'm tracking the days, but we're on day 58 of the lockout, the first work stoppage in baseball since the strike in 94. And the good news, at least that's as far as we can take it, is to say that earlier this week, the representatives for the players and the owners met in person for a couple negotiating sessions, which, 50 plus days into a lockout is not much. That's not, I have to catch myself when I get excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're actually talking and they've agreed on a couple really minor points. It's a relative excitement because it was preceded by just absolute silence for a month and a half. So that's good. But the reality of this process is that while the sides have narrowed the scope of some of the issues that they are dealing with, landing where they need to land to make a deal, they're still really far apart. And we are at the point where realistically, a deal is not going to come together before spring training is impacted in some way. So it already feels like a shame. I mean, I know that the pressure of the regular season arriving was probably always going to be necessary given the acrimony between the sides to get a deal done. But unfortunately, any hopes that we might have had for a normal spring training are effectively dashed.
Brett, I tried to paint the rosy picture back in the first week of December saying, okay, we have issues that need to be worked out. This is the proactive thing to do. Do this now, because when it was December 1st, you had plenty of time before pitchers and catchers were supposed to report and plenty of time before that calendar flipped the page. But now I almost feel foolish for trying to paint that rosy picture back then, because here we are. And as a fan like yourself, first and foremost, I feel like at this point, it's okay for us to be a little ticked off.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't call you foolish for being hopeful at that time. I think a lot of us hoped that although it would have been very realistic to expect at that time, nothing would really get done before the holidays, both because, like you said, there was plenty of time, and because just as a practical matter, it wasn't going to make sense for them to push too hard when they'd already entered into shutdown mode. So that made sense. What I think we didn't, I don't know if I would say expect, but what we certainly didn't hope for was another, almost 3 weeks into January before the owners came back with their first offer since the lockout. The way this went down, for those that don't know, is the sides had sort of vaguely been making offers starting early last year. The CBA was due to expire on December 1st, 2021. And it's not like it caught anybody off guard. The sides knew that that was happening. And they exchanged some broad concepts. The last coming in that final week before the lockout from the players, a variety of concepts, and the owners effectively said they weren't going to counter before the CBA expired unless the players agreed to take certain items entirely off the table. So that's what preceded the lockout. And then the owners' first offer of the lockout, the first counter to the last player offer, didn't come, like I said, until 3 weeks into January. And it was an offer that didn't really move anything much. So that was very disappointing. That was frustrating. And that is certainly what set the stage for us to feel like, well, maybe they'll get a deal done that doesn't affect the regular season, but certainly the timeline as far as spring training went, that's when we knew it was going to get muddied.
So in that realm, then you alluded to it a little bit. So, pitchers and catchers essentially would be reporting here in a couple weeks and in a normal calendar year, which is, you get that. This is the time of year you start to get the juices flowing. Unfortunately, we're kind of robbed of that. So spring training will be impacted. How does that, let the dominoes fall down the line? Then what are we looking at in your world? Because like you kind of said in the open, we haven't even finished the off season yet, but here we are trying to get baseball started. It's all kind of a big mess.
Yeah. Mess is that's the exact word. That's what I was going to say is it's a situation where there's already not a great way to do this. We're already to that point, because as you said, in a regular schedule, pitchers and catchers would report in mid-February. The exhibition schedule would start at the very end of February, and then you'd have a month before the regular season starts. And although that's always been held up as probably a bit more than the players need, it is certainly the case that when you get into the 3-week window for spring training, that's when players would start to say that that's just not enough, particularly pitchers. And if you start working backwards from opening day, well, that would mean that you'd have to be full bore on spring training by the end of that first week of March. And that would mean in turn, and that's again, bare minimum spring training. I don't know that players appreciated having only a 3-week ramp up during the pandemic season. So, I mean, they have experience with it. And so I think 4 weeks is probably more realistic. But as you alluded to, we've still got an off season to finish. And it isn't just about getting those free agents who haven't signed to land somewhere. It's a matter of there's arbitration to settle that hasn't been dealt with at all. There's Rule 5 draft that has to be conducted. There are international players that have to get their visas squared away and to get into the United States. There are COVID protocols to consider and the timelines for that. So again, you said it, it's a mess. And I think that most of us who observe these things and try to calculate what's necessary would say that it'd be pretty hard to finish the offseason in under 2 weeks. And if that's the case, then you're looking at having to have a deal done within maybe 2.5 weeks from us sitting here today in order to have finish the offseason and a super expedited crunched spring training and not have opening day moved. And boy, I got to tell you, Andrew, it is hard for me to see a deal being done in 2.5 weeks, given the pace of the negotiations and given how far apart the sides are.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that at all. Want to talk about some of the moves the Cubs did make before things were frozen here in a moment. Before we do, want to mention Built Bar. And if your New Year's resolution is to get healthier, you have to incorporate Built Bar in your plan. It's like a candy bar that tastes good. It's good for you too. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, 17 grams of protein. If you're not familiar with macronutrients, those are really good, especially compared to a normal junky candy bar. 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. Built Bar has so many great flavors: coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, salted caramel. You won't get tired of their selection. Go to built.com today. Use code LOCKED15 for 15% off. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15 at built.com. Brett Taylor's our guest here on Locked On Cubs today. Great to have you with us this morning. We thank you for making us your first listen each and every morning. It means the world to us. Brett Taylor, Bleacher Nation. Brett, you talked about it. We had a miniature offseason before the lockout, and the Cubs were busy. You're right. It was a tease. Marcus Stroman and Frazier and the Wade Miley waiver deal before that, which I love. We can get into that if you want, but grade them out. They were busier, I think, than maybe some thought they would be. And the Stroman thing was obviously a very big splash before business shut down.
Yeah, I would say they would even concede they were busier than maybe they expected to be. I think Jed Hoyer, teed it up heading into the offseason that knowing that the CBA was unsettled, the Cubs wanted to take a very measured approach to the offseason because so much can change in the CBA, from the level of the luxury tax, from the consequences for signing a qualified free agent, to the way you would think about building a roster for your 2, 3, 4, 5 year timeline. And so it certainly made sense to want to know as much as you could before you start making these moves. But the market is the market, and sometimes you can't fight the what the market is going to do. And so, particularly, I look at the Marcus Stroman signing as something the Cubs always wanted to do, but I don't know that they were thinking they were going to get that done in late November, early December. But certainly they realized that the starting pitching market had just flown to that point. And so if they were going to get a guy that they knew they wanted, it was going to have to be then. And I think they did not only an excellent job in landing a guy who was arguably one of the best starting pitchers on the free agent market, arguably the best. There are some statistical arguments to be made there.
Mm-hmm.
And, they got him on a deal that a 3-year deal at a high annual value is the kind of deal that we think makes a lot of sense for the Cubs in this sort of transitional period. It's clear they're not, and I thought this even before the Miley claim, before the Stroman signing, Frazier, Yan Gomes. This is not a situation where the Cubs are trying to bottom out in 2022. It is not the beginning of the rebuild. It's really more akin to some of the years 3, 4 of the rebuild, where they knew the best version of their team was probably not there yet, but they wanted to at least give themselves a chance in the first half. And when you have as much roster flexibility as the Cubs do and as much financial flexibility as the Cubs do, you should be playing in the high annual value, short-term contract world, because those deals, maybe they set you up for surprising success in 2022. And if not, they leave you in a position to simultaneously improve your organization at the trade deadline by virtue of moving some short-term pieces. But also, they don't put you in a situation where you're feeling crunched in future years because you tried to buy your way into competing earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I loved the Stroman signing because it feels wholly appropriate. I loved the Gomes signing, Yan Gomes, to be Wilson Contreras' backup catcher, because my Lord, that was such an issue this past year that the Cubs had so many injuries at backup catcher that it left Wilson Contreras to play quite a bit more than you would otherwise want him to. And so love having a quality veteran in that spot. And I think, we don't have to drill down too much into it, but even bringing in, a Clint Frazier, a guy with tons of talent, and was available only because of injury issues and certain struggles at the big league level that mean he's not likely to become a star for the Cubs or even a regular. But that's the kind of swing the Cubs should be taking right now. He's still young. He's got that potential. They have the playing time available. Give it a go. You might as well right now, because in a couple of years, you wouldn't be able to offer the same opportunity to a guy like Clint Frazier.
With everything slowed down, the Carlos Correa talks are never ending, and they were. I mean, there was linkage between the Cubs and his camp before the lockout. What camp are you in with the Correa thing? I mean, you know what kind of money he's going to want. You know what kind of terms in terms of years he's probably going to want, after the Seager deal with Texas. There are other options to upgrade the middle infield, especially the shortstop position. Cubs willing to go the 7, 8, 9, 10-year thing? Probably not. But where you at on Correa, and how you feeling about that post-lockout?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a I have found it to be a challenging topic to talk about in a nuanced way because on the one hand, as a player, it's a no-brainer. I mean, every team should want Carlos Correa on their team. Like that's not the issue. And even at age 27, there's an argument to be made that he fits with any organization, any timeline. That's not a question. I think where you try to think about this in a thoughtful way is when you do start talking about the kind of deal that it's going to require to sign him, probably 10 plus years, probably near record annual value level. You have to remember that you are committing your organization to spending a lot of dollars in 25, 26, 27, 28 when that might impact your organization in a way that you can't predict today.
Yeah.
So that's why it tends to be the case that signings like that come from teams that know they are in a very good position to win right now. It is because they are willing to trade some of that future uncertainty, some of that potential future pain in order to really push their team right now. And so that's why, on the one hand, I totally get it when fans say, hey, he's only 27. Like, okay, so the Cubs might not be great in 2022 or 2023. He'll still be young in 24, 25, and they'll still need him. Well, first of all, maybe. I mean, sometimes guys decline rapidly and it's a surprise to you. But second of all, you lost the most valuable years you were probably going to get from him in years that your team was maybe not competitive. And you did so in part by paying that future price. And the other point to make is, because I know it's the other response I get all the time, the Cubs have plenty of money. They should spend, they should paper over mistakes. They should deal with it. Hey, if you want to make that argument that the Cubs should, spend $400 million every year on payroll, fine. I'm not going to fight with you. You're entitled to fan however you want to fan, and I know that the owners are generally doing very well, so you can make that argument. But I try to operate in the world where I recognize there's always going to be a budget, and whoever is running the Cubs in 26, 27, 28 is going to have to deal with the contracts that are on the books. And so I do think it makes sense to at least keep that in mind when you talk about this stuff. All that said, if the Cubs have other moves in mind coming out of the lockout that would position them to have an even better chance of competing in 2022 than we think now, then by all means, Correa starts to make a lot more sense. I don't think that's happening. I think there are still going to be enough questions about the rotation, for example, that can't really be addressed from here, that it's hard for me to see this being like a dead bang obvious winner in the NL Central, even with Carlos Correa. Again, not a reason not to do it. It's just a reason to be very thoughtful about what that contract looks like and what it's going to look like for your organization down the road. And there are creative approaches too, to a contract. It doesn't have to be a straight 10-year massive deal. And if he's interested in entertaining that, there are approaches I've written about at Bleacher Nation that might work for the Cubs and for Correa. But I think it's, we just don't have a great sense because of the lockout. Like, we haven't been able to explore what he's really into.
Knowing what we know about this roster as it stands now, post-lockout, Brett, you have the keys to the Cubs ship. What's on your to-do list when business resumes as normal?
Well, one of the first things is something I know is almost certainly not on the Cubs, actual plan. So I guess I'm just wrong on this, but Carlos Rodon is out there. He is not attached to a qualifying offer. He is going to be a very high risk signing for whatever team signs him. To me, that means there aren't going to be a lot of competitive teams that can commit a lot of 2022 dollars to him because he might not give you anything. And the Cubs are in a situation where they know they might not be competitive in 2022. They know they have tons of short-term dollars available. To me, that's a marriage that makes a ton of sense because if he does surprise to the upside, he's a guy who can sort of single-handedly transform your rotation and maybe
Mhm.
helps you be competitive. But if he gives you nothing, if he breaks, if the velocity doesn't come back, if whatever, I don't know. How much is that really hurting the 2022 Cubs? Because they weren't going to have that anyway. So if he's a guy that you could maybe bring in on a 1-year deal at a huge annual dollar amount, go do it. That's something that I would seriously explore. Again, it doesn't sound like the Cubs are looking that way. Otherwise, it's similar moves like that, shorter term. The guys that perhaps can't find the multi-year deal that they're looking for in the condensed offseason part two, and maybe just want an opportunity to have surefire playing time, make a really good salary in 22, and try again in 2023, or even if it's a 2 or 3 year deal, let it look like Stroman's. I mean, there's a reason that made sense too, and so that's certainly what I would explore. A power outfield bat would be nice. One of those premium defensive shortstops would be nice, and a couple arms in the bullpen because that, you know, I don't want to be too cynical about it, but that can leave you some nice opportunities in July at the trade deadline if your team does fall out of it.
Is it scary to invest too much in a very established veteran reliever, given the flux from year to year? I mean, I know there's a Kenley Jansen out there who's probably top of that class, but he's going to command a big salary, and he's in a advanced age. Had a great year, reinvented himself essentially. But I always leery about investing too much in the pen, and with established guy, bigger contracts. You want veteran leadership and established guys, but in terms of the type of money, say that a Jansen would want.
Sure. And we've seen that. I think you're making a very fair point because we've seen it for about the last 10 years. The guys who aren't those established closers just have seemed to have that, classic reliever variability where,
Mhm.
um, for whatever reason, the premium setup guy this year might not be the premium setup guy next year, and I think you do have to be cautious. And I think the contracts that we've seen uh, the last maybe 4 or 5 years have borne that out, where sort of those guys they always tend to be like early to mid 30s. They've put together a couple great years in a setup role somewhere, and then they finally hit free agency and time was back in, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, those guys were getting serious deals. They were getting closer level deals. And it sort of repeatedly didn't work out, and teams have adjusted. They have started to do a better calculus about how well they can manage their own internal options in the bullpen. And now those guys are really seeing more like a 2-year, more modest deal. What I think is interesting about that market coming out of the lockout is there are still a ton of options like that. I mean, the best examples, ironically, are two former Cubs. You have Andrew Chafin and Ryan Tepera, they are exactly what I'm talking about. They had formerly decent, in their careers, but then they had a significant resurgence with the Cubs in their early 30s. You can evaluate them with whatever metric you want, including, a lot that we can do now at StatCast, where you're evaluating the quality of pitches, and they look really, really good. But I just think you have to be a little bit cautious about how aggressive you're going to be with those types of guys. I think there are enough of them that the Cubs are going to be able to play in that market. I think we will see them, maybe not with those two specific guys. I know a lot of Cubs fans are really attached to Andrew Chafin, and I mean, I'd love to see him back. He's really entertaining. But I think we'll see the Cubs sign one or two of those higher tier setup types, um, maybe even on deals that surprise people, but that's in part because the Cubs have that money to spend short term. And, again, I'm spending other people's money here, but as far as payroll goes, you can't take it with you. So, you might as well spend it this year on some interesting guys that can help shore up a bullpen that is really deep in good young options, but not established. And so I think you're going to have a lot of questions, especially in the first half.
I know you're a prospect guy, so I want to get down on the farm here momentarily. With the new year comes a new updated desktop and mobile site at Bet Online. Sign up today. They have an awesome promo going, 50% off your first deposit. That's a welcome bonus of 50% at Bet Online. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. It's not just football. Bet Online, it's got basketball and hockey and boxing and UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite play and favorite games as well. Bet Online, where the game starts. Along with Brett Taylor today on Locked On Cubs. Great to be with you. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every morning. Brett, I know you're a prospect guy. I love that. That's one of my favorite parts of what you write about is some of these young guns the Cubs have, because they've really done a great job at kind of restocking the talent level at the minor league level. I know we were all frustrated when the core got dealt last year, but now we're really starting to see the haul they got back for some of those core guys. And there's a heck of a lot of talent down there. Who excites you the most, or who are you most looking forward to seeing once we get back to baseball?
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't love these. This is not a rebuilding era, but these times when the big league team is maybe not as good. But I'm a nerd for the prospect stuff, so like I do get geeked. I'm really excited about this upcoming minor league season. As you said, increasingly, and I'm offering this from the perspective of outsiders, not just from the Cubs organization itself, or even from me as a fan, but increasingly, people are seeming to think that the Cubs did exceedingly well at the trade deadline. Sad, perhaps, to part with some of those players, but in the deals that they made, they brought back significant talent, and it really goes back to the Yu Darvish trade too. Same sort of emotional feel to it, where it's sad and not maybe what we wanted to see in the moment. And indeed, the return in that is maybe the best example of what you're asking about. The Cubs, they landed 4 very young prospects, very inexperienced prospects in that deal, because they went for more volume and upside than sort of like maybe concentrating it in one established prospect. At the time, sure seemed really risky. It probably was. But now we have seen a little bit of the fruit of that, insofar as a couple of the prospects in that deal, Reggie Preciado and Owen Casey, established themselves this year as legitimate prospects. That's really all you're looking for in a deal like that, is that a year later you look at it and you say, okay, out of these 4 super young guys, did any of them at least put themselves on the radar as like legit, okay, it's worth following this guy prospects? And those 2 certainly did. The Cubs also had, by most accounts, a very successful draft this year. They got a lefty in Jordan Wicks. They're picking in the low 20s. They had him pegged going, closer to 10. And so that feels like a big win to them. And indeed, we've come to understand that the second rounder that they got in the 50s, James Triantos, was a guy they were potentially targeting in the first round until Wicks fell. And so to land 2 guys that you wanted sort of in the middle of that first round in any draft, it feels like a win. And then again, the external evaluations have rolled in, and the thinking is, darn, the Cubs did really well to land those 2. It's almost like a touch of like, damn it, they did do really well on that. Third rounder, just a shout out to Drew Gray as well, another sort of underscouted two-way player who has committed to pitching full time. And as soon as he did, he really popped in the fall in Instructs. And again, to get 3 prospects out of 1 draft when you are drafting late with a smaller bonus pool, you don't have extra picks like other teams. It just feels like they did really, really well. And so I'm excited to see those guys in their first full pro seasons. But it's just so many. Pete Crow Armstrong was a young guy that got in a deal. Kevin Alcantara was a young guy that got in a deal. Who else? Oh, Caleb Killian, who really broke out in the fall. Nelson Velasquez, who had a huge fall. And I haven't even mentioned Brennan Davis, who is the consensus top prospect in the Cubs system. And he may impact the big league team by midseason next year. So I guess the headline is, this is the deepest I can remember the Cubs system being in legitimate prospects. strongly lacking in the upper level impact guys. So that's why it isn't the best I've ever seen this farm system by far. It's just that it's the deepest. And a lot of the external reviews and rankings bear that out.
Yeah, well said. That's exciting for us Cubs fans here as we start to move forward. Before we let you go, I have to bring up the Hall of Fame. 'Tis the season. I don't know who is supposed to decide and draw the line with some of these players from the steroid era in terms of entrance into Cooperstown or not. Maybe you can explain something to me that has always just bugged the hell out of me is the discord between the love Sosa got from voters compared to the Bonds and the Clemens. They're all off the ballot now. They're done. Ortiz gets in first ballot. Great for him. The numbers warrant that. But Sosa never got the love those other guys did. And I just don't fully understand why. I've heard a lot of explanations. I just haven't bought any of them.
Yeah, I think you and the listeners have probably heard them all, and to varying degrees, they inform the way different voters think. I mean, I think the biggest is that there was a belief among many voters that with Bonds and Clemens, they were Hall of Fame caliber players, whether they juiced or not. Whereas the thinking from those types of thinkers is that Sammy Sosa was not. It was that he was a product of the steroid era exclusively. I mean, and I would offer too that other than the home runs, which he did do things that no one else had done. That's notable. He's still the only guy to have 3 seasons of 60 or more homers.
Yeah.
That's notable. That's meaningful. It was fun as hell to watch. But from a when you evaluate the whole player relative to their era, there is a statistical argument you could make that Sosa was not, that his peak wasn't long enough and maybe wasn't high enough to really stand out from so many other players who were very, very good during that era. I think I will admit I've gone back and forth on Sosa, over these last 10 years of voting, at times thinking, okay, even if I throw out the PD considerations, which I generally do, by the way, because the reality now, I feel bad for the players who were clean, but that was an era where clearly at a league level, MLB had decided to abdicate any kind of meaningful enforcement of those rules. Players could look around and see that the game was being played in a way around them that was unfair. It was almost unfair if you didn't take proactive measures, to enhance your body. And so and the league was celebrating 2 guys in McGuire and Sosa that, we're not idiots. We knew what was going on. And so for us to now act like, okay, but you guys were doing something that the league was basically tacitly endorsing, and now we're going to punish you for it. I just have trouble with that now. And so for me, really the evaluation of Sammy Sosa is just a very traditional question of like, was he truly one of the elite among the elite in an era where offense was very high? And that's just where I struggle, because he's real close. I mean, he's real close for me. I think, if I had a ballot and this was his last year on the ballot, he'd get my vote. Maybe that just makes me a Cubs fan homer, but I think I would have to check that box.
Brett Taylor does wonderful work with Bleacher Nation. Check them out. Brett, can't thank you enough for taking the time today. This was a really awesome conversation, and I hope maybe we can do it again at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure getting to meet you sort of in person. But like you said, I feel like we've known each other so long, but me longer than you, because I know that wonderful voice. So it's nice to communicate with you this way.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Fingers crossed for the best here as baseball season hopefully continues to move forward. We've got plenty more CBA updates, etc., later in the week here on Locked On Cubs and much, much more. Have a great day, everybody. Brett, thanks again.
Thank you.